So last week, before the message, Brian Lumshu Chan was talking about this series that we're starting today in Ecclesiastes, and he said that in his lifetime, he figures that he has heard a little more than 1,000 sermons, at least 1,000 sermons, and yet he could not remember ever hearing a sermon out of the book of Ecclesiastes. And I can understand why that is. One of the most respected commentaries on the book of Ecclesiastes written in the last 30 years, the first sentence in that commentary is this: Ecclesiastes may be the most difficult biblical book to interpret and preach. Ergo, people avoid it like the plague, okay? And it's easy to understand why this is the case, because when you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, it comes across as contradictory, inconsistent, cynical, sarcastic. You may read the book of Ecclesiastes and say, where is God in this book? In fact, there are some who even argue that the very end of the book contradicts and tries to correct the previous 12 and a half chapters, that the first 12 and a half chapters are so off base that the author at the very end of the book, the editor, tries to correct it all in the last few pages or last few verses of the book. And those of you who maybe have begun to read through it, as I requested last week, you're probably already beginning to scratch your head. But I'll tell you something, I've come to love this book as I have been marinating in it over the last 2.5 months, kind of just reading it and soaking it in to prepare for this summer. Over the summer, I intend to give you a survey of this book. I wish there were time to do a thorough exposition of each verse, but if we did that, we will still be in Ecclesiastes next summer, and you're going to get tired of it, and you'll go weary, and then you'll stop coming to church, and then I'll get fired. So we're not going to do that. But by the time we do get done, I think that you will have a good appreciation for the structure of the book, and we're going to touch on the major sections, the major themes that are in the book, so that when we all is said and done, you're going to understand what this book is all about, and hopefully you're going to see it for the gem that it really is, and better understand why God has given it to us. And you're certainly going to understand, I believe, why we've titled it Meaningless with the less in parentheses. And you'll begin to get a better and better understanding of why that is as we progress. Now, this morning's passage is extremely critical, and this message is critical. It lays the foundation, frankly, for the rest of the summer. So everybody who's playing hooky this morning, they are behind the 8 ball, and then when they come next week or the week after, they're going to scratch their heads, and you are to look at them with a certain amount of arrogant contempt and say, if you'd only been in church when we started this series, you would be as good as we are, okay? No, don't do that. But they are going to have to go back and listen to this message because this is foundational. And so this morning, I wanted us to do several things. I hope to show you the setting and the context of Ecclesiastes, the summary framework of the book, the opening argument that the preacher gives us, a very critical qualifier that is going to shape your understanding of the next 8 to 10 weeks. And then finally, a redemptive purpose. If you have an electronic device and you are plugged into YouVersion, if you go under the events portion of YouVersion, you can pull up the sermon notes, or many of the sermon notes definitions that I'm going to be giving you are already there in that. We have a guest network and there is no password. Just get onto it and you can go from there. So let's start with verse 1. Verse 1 gives us the setting and the context. It says, the words of the preacher. Now right there we got to stop, because the words of the preacher is implying somebody is speaking here other than the preacher, and that's correct. And that's important for us to understand within the context and setting of the book, because the preacher is a character in the book. The author is someone who is different. He speaks here in verse 1, and we are going to hear his voice again in chapter 12, verses 9 to 14, as he reflects back on everything that the preacher says, beginning in verse 2 and concluding in chapter 12, verse 8. Right now, we're hearing the voice of the author. The words of the preacher. That word preacher is the Hebrew word kohelet, and it means one who speaks in an assembly. And so that's why it gets translated as teacher or preacher, depending upon the translation you're using this morning. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, the root word for this is ekklesia, which is where we get the word church. And who is the person who speaks in the church? The what? Preacher, right, okay? And of course, ekklesia sounds a whole lot like Ecclesiastes, exactly. That's where we get the name Ecclesiastes from that Greek word ekklesia. The words of the preacher. Now, who is the preacher? He's the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Now, there was only one son of David who was king in Jerusalem. That was Solomon. And so traditionally, historically, the preacher has been identified as Solomon. Now, it could very well be that it was Solomon. Certainly, there are many proverbs in this book, and Solomon was the author of Proverbs. Some people have objected and said, but Solomon was a king, not a preacher. But if you go to 1 Kings chapter 8, you will find Solomon standing before the assembly of Israel and preaching to them and instructing and teaching to them. And so it's possible that Solomon was or is this preacher. However, there's also many reasons to believe that it is not Solomon, and personally, that's where I land. For one thing, Solomon was not shy about identifying himself as the author of the book of Proverbs, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. He didn't equivocate and hide that he was the voice, whereas this verse does. Some other reasons why I don't think Solomon is the preacher is that when you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, the setting is very different than the time of Solomon. The society is very different than the society of the 900s BC. And for one thing, the preacher is continually talking about how there is crime and injustice and all kinds of oppression taking place in the land, and he is powerless to do anything about it. But understand that when Solomon was king, he was all-powerful. If he saw any type of oppression or injustice, he could immediately correct it and do something about it. There are other internal clues that make me think that no, Solomon is not who the preacher is. And in fact, all the way back to the 1500s, Martin Luther moving forward, many prominent pastors and scholars and theologians have put forward that Solomon is not the preacher. So what we have happening here is a rather unique situation. It reminds me of what I saw many years ago. One of the first times I watched the Coral Ridge Hour, which was with the late Dr. D. James Kennedy at Coral Ridge Presbyterian in Fort Lauderdale. A wonderful preacher, and sometimes Dr. Kennedy would take sermons from previous centuries and he would preach those sermons almost verbatim to his congregation in order to give them an appreciation for voices from the past. And when he would do that, he might dress up in a costume of that previous century preacher. Or if he was preaching from a passage in the text, like maybe Elijah the prophet, he might come out on stage dressed as Elijah the prophet, speaking that entire sermon as if he were Elijah the prophet, and it transformed the effectiveness of his sermon. It was very engaging, it was very riveting, it gave it a different flavor, a different authority. And essentially, this is what you have happening here with this preacher. He is putting on the clothing, the mantle, the identity of Solomon as he speaks to this audience at this particular time in history to give his teachings the authority, the effectiveness, the gripping nature that he wants it to have. And so it's important to see this because when he was writing, if we understand it right based upon the internal evidence, he was writing after the exile. The children of Israel spent time in Babylon in prison. They've come back. It's a couple of hundred years later. We're in like the 3rd century BC. Ecclesiastes ends up being the last book of the Bible written. And their society is in complete uproar. And he's writing based upon the internal evidence of the book and who he addresses in the book. He's writing to very young connected, maybe aristocratic, influential, young, upcoming men in the society. These men are struggling to connect the dots between their faith, between the stories that they heard their fathers tell about how things used to be in their country and in their faith and the way things were currently in their society. They're under the control of the Ptolemies out of Egypt, and Israel and Palestine has become a battleground between competing world empires. Even their religion and the way they were practicing their faith in the temple has changed because they're in this period of time where God has been silent. There has been no prophet like Elijah or Isaiah or Jeremiah who's been on the scene now for maybe a couple of centuries. And God has been silent, and he will continue to be silent until Jesus is born. And so these folks, they are dealing with a society that's in uproar, a politically unstable environment. And their economy has begun to change from an economy that had been the same for more than 1,000 years to a more Western-style economy. And a new economic paradigm is in place where money and commerce and things like this are beginning to become more and more prevalent, not family land-oriented. And they're asking, how do we live in this type of society? How do we find purpose in our lives? And they're trying to find meaning and make their mark in life in a world that's topsy-turvy and make sense of it all. And so Ecclesiastes is this older man, this preacher, this wise man's attempt at answering these big questions that they're asking. Now, with that setting in mind, let's go to verse 2, because verse 2, if there's one verse that might be the most important verse in order to understand the book, it's verse 2. These are the first words of the preacher. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. These are the first words that were given of the preacher. His last words, chapter 12, verse 8, sound the same. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. So everything we hear from the preacher begins with vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity in verse 2, and it ends very similarly. In verse 2, that is 8 words in the Hebrew, and 5 of them are the same word, what we see as vanity. You need to underline that word. It is the Hebrew word hevel. Hevel, spelled H-E-B as in boy, E-L. Literally, it means a breath or vapor or smoke. But in the book of Ecclesiastes, it's being used in a metaphorical way. Let me give you an illustration that might help you understand what it means. When I was a kid, I had a great dog. And there was this dog I had from the time I was 6 to the time I was 15. And her name was Chica, Spanish for girl, right? And this dog and I, we were inseparable. Wonderful dog. But she had a couple of idiosyncrasies. One, which I thought about this morning, was she hated cats. Now, I need to talk to my therapist about that. I'm wondering if that's how come I have that hang-up about cats. But anyway, I've never seen a dog that hated cats as voraciously and as violently as Chica hated cats. But she also had another idiosyncrasy. She had a thing about smoke. And so one of my chores on a regular basis, especially in the fall, we had a big tree in our backyard. I would have to rake up all the leaves, and then because, this was before you had to worry about things like getting in trouble for burning things, we burned our leaves in a backyard, right, and up in the Jacksonville area. And these leaves, whatever type of tree it was, or maybe it's because I was 8 and didn't really know how to set a fire, I don't know, but it would produce this dark white and blackish smoke, and it was thick smoke. And when that smoke would start to come off those leaves, Chica, she would go absolutely nuts. And she would start barking, and she would start trying to bite the smoke. And the more she would try to bite the smoke, the more frustrated she would get, right? And she would actually even start jumping over the leaves into the air, trying to snap at the smoke. And this would go on and on and on. It was really kind of funny to watch until finally she would get so frustrated that she would sit down on the ground and she would begin to howl like a wolf or a dog. She would begin to do this because she was so irritated and frustrated that she couldn't get a hold and grab and bite the smoke. Well, you understand what was going on here, right? The smoke to her looked solid. It looked substantial. It looked like something that you could get a hold of and sink your teeth into. But the problem is, it was an illusion. It was hollow. It was insubstantial and inconsequential. That's what hevel means. Okay? It's something that is empty. It's an illusion. It's an enigma. It confuses you. It's like vapor. You know what vapor is like? You see it coming off your pot, steam. You see it for just a second and it's gone. It's fleeting. It's here 1 minute and then it's gone. That's hevel. And so to understand hevel, it has a multiple number of meanings. The context sets which meaning it is. It can mean fleeting or empty or absurd or futile, like snapping at smoke. What a futile activity that is. Or unpredictable, or an enigma. Its most common meaning and definition is empty or meaningless. The meaningless is the most common definition. So hevel is the preacher's response to the answers, to the solutions that we give to life's biggest questions. And it becomes the theme, the operating framework of the book. The biggest questions we ask, and the biggest answers, and the biggest coping mechanisms, and the biggest solutions that we put forward to those questions, the preacher responds with hevel. Hevel. You want meaning and purpose? You want to know what you're here on earth for? You want a grand unifying theory of everything? You want to have a surefire formula that will bring you peace and joy and satisfaction and happiness? You want to be remembered? You want to make your mark upon the world and make the world a better place? The preacher says, good luck. Or to quote Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, dream on. Okay? Not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's all hevel. Hevel. All things that humanity relies upon are hevel. They're meaningless. They're empty. They're futile. Because what we rely upon is temporary. It's fleeting. It's insufficient. It's absurd. Even the good things, even the good coping mechanisms we may adopt, like knowledge or wisdom, it's hevel in the long run, because life is just too unpredictable. I mean, this week, if nothing else, this week I was just reminded, beginning Wednesday with you, Chris, life just doesn't make sense sometimes. Sin is so pervasive in this world, and our world is just so broken. But even our best coping mechanisms that sound so good, like I'm going to pursue wisdom, you're going to come across situations where wisdom falls short, and you can't explain why this is happening. It's hevel. Life's just too unpredictable for anything to be considered an absolute like that. Is he right? Is he right? He thinks he's right. Throughout the book, the preacher is going to look at life from a variety of different directions, and he's going to test his theory, his argument, this framework, this theme. He's going to test it against different human experiences. And he's going to invite us into that test. He's kind of like a scientist who's saying, let's see if it's right in this area. Let's see if it's right in that area. And these opening verses, in verses 3 to 11, he takes on and he deconstructs the most common approach that we give I think, to finding purpose and meaning and satisfaction in our lives. So his opening argument begins in verse 3. It's in the form of a question. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? Now underline the word gain and underline the word toil. The word gain is the Hebrew word yithron. It's going to be in Ecclesiastes 10 times. It is a business term that means profit or advantage or success. Okay? And the word toil is the generic Hebrew word of all, and it's going to be, we're going to come across it 29 times. So he keeps coming back to toil over and over again, 29 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, and it refers to our work, our career, our labor, the things that keep us busy, primarily our work and labor. And so he's asking a very important question. Considering how busy we are in our work and how hard we work and how much time and effort we invest in our careers and in our labor, whether it's in the home or outside of the home, when all is said and done, what is really left that has true and lasting value? When all is said and done, when you look at all the amount of time and energy you put into your work, what real difference does it make? Is it truly profitable? That's the question. He'll come back to it again. It's kind of a rhetorical question, as it is in chapter 3, verse 9. What gain has the worker from his toil? It's a rhetorical question. You already know the answer, right? The answer is in verse 2. And the answer is what? Hevel. Hevel. Vanity. Meaningless. What gain has the worker from his toil? None. In the long run, none. He's explicit in chapter 2. I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. And then he goes about proving it by way of an analogy. In verses 4 to 10, he's giving us an analogy that proves his answer. He says, okay, you may not agree to me, so let's go to nature. He says, a generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. In other words, the world is just a very repetitive place. Nothing really changes. You look at nature, over and over and over again, things occur day in, day out, day in, day out. Nothing changes. Nothing is fulfilled. Nothing is satisfied. Just as all the activity of nature gains nothing, so all the activity of man. Everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything that we speak of, it gains nothing. All your work will be unsatisfying ultimately. You can be so successful that you see with your eyes all of your life goals accomplished, and you can hear with your ears all kinds of accolades about what a great job you have done and how wonderful you are in your career, but ultimately it will not satisfy you. Instead, you will end up full of weariness and unsatisfied. You will have invested all that energy and effort and labor, and it's hevel, he says. What has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done again. And there is nothing new under the sun. You're putting all that time and effort and energy and forming and relying upon your work to give you meaning and satisfaction and answer the big questions of life. And the truth is, it's just the same old, over and over and over again. Generations rise and generations fall, and the mountain's standing over there laughing at us because the earth remains unchanged. How many of us said as teenagers, when I grow up and I become a dad, I will not do that to my kids. I won't make that mistake. I won't be like that. I won't do that to my son, right? And we grow up, and what do? The exact same thing all over again, right? We make all the same mistakes that the previous generations make. We don't learn a thing. In fact, in some cases, we actually improve on their mistakes, right? We put all of our time and our energy and our efforts into the next generation. Next generation, our hope is in the next generation. Man, right? And we have great hopes for the next generation. And each generation, Generation X, Generation Y, Boomers, Xers, Millennials, each generation just succeeds in making a mess of things like the previous generation did. Nothing really changes. And now some of us are going to say, wait a second. Things are new. After all, we're about to see, again, a rocket take off and land right back at the same pad. That's new. Space exploration is new. Computers are new. Look at this device that I'm looking at. I'm looking at the Bible on an electronic device. That's new. And so the preacher anticipates this. He goes, now some of you are going to think, and you're going to say, see, this is new. See, he's a good teacher. He's obviously had a few smart alecks in his class at some point in time. And so he's anticipating that. See, this is new. His response, it has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things. That's the problem. We don't remember our past. Nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. Everything that we have already fits within categories of motive, cause and effect, and classification that have been around for generations and generations and generations. The thrill we get out of exploring the stars is the thrill that the Portuguese got out of exploring the New World, which is the thrill that the Vikings got out of exploring the North Atlantic, which is the thrill that the Phoenicians got out of exploring the Mediterranean world. And I can go back and back and back and back through the annals of human history. The thrill is there. And the reason why it was done, profit, and itch, dissatisfaction, all the motives, still all the same. We put different lipstick on the pig, but the pig is still a pig. That's what it comes down to. And that's in the lines, in between the lines in the Hebrew, so you know. Okay? And no matter how important it is, and no matter how important you think your contribution is, he says, it's going to be forgotten. No one's going to remember. This passage is telling us something. Time marches on and on and on. And you give it enough time, and sooner or later, you'll be forgotten. And yet nothing will really change. Hevel, hevel, hevel. I like what Tim Keller says. He goes, the preacher, his answer and his question here, it is so pertinent for today because the predominant worldview in our society today is that of secular humanism, right? And the secular humanist comes to these big questions of how do I live a good life? How do I have a life of meaning? And the preacher's answer just completely destroys the solutions that the secular humanist worldview puts forward. You see, secular humanism tells us that matter is all that there is. This natural world is all that there's. This world is it. The universe is it. Matter is essentially God, okay? Science is king. It's the natural world. And if you want to have a good life, the best that you can do is that you make the world a better place. You've been to funerals. We're lucky to have known this person. We're blessed to have had this person in our lives. We're all better people because this person was in our lives. The world was a better place. The world is a poorer place because this person is no longer here. You see, in secular humanism, that is the meaning, the only meaning we can get. Because this world is all there is. And we're just a collection of chemicals that have come together in some random chance, and when we die, we just go back to the dust, and that's it. And what matters is matter in this physical world. And so the best that we can do is pay it forward and make the world a better place. And the preacher says, that is a bunch of horse hockey. That's hooey. That's just empty platitudes. Future generations aren't even going to remember what you've done to make the world a better place, and you can't even make the world a better place. Not in the long run. It's all hevel. They're not even going to remember you. Why are you wasting your time? Hey, let's test it. Ready? Here we go. I'm going to count to 3 and say go, and when I do, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to tell them the name of your maternal, that means your mom's mom, your maternal grandmother, your mom's mom. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3, go. All right, how many of you passed the test? Raise your hand. Now be honest, that's pretty good. Now how many of you failed the test? Raise your hand, come on, be honest. Okay, there's a few that didn't know. All right. All right, let's take another test. You ready? I'm going to count to 3, say to go, and I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to tell them your maternal great-great-great-grandmother. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Come on, first and last name. Let's go. All right, y'all are just bulling. That's all you're doing. You don't know. All right? You don't know. All right. Let's just take this out. How many of you failed the test? Be honest. Raise your hand. Yeah, most of you. All right, let's see. Did anybody pass the test in here? We have a couple. Okay, we have a couple. We have 3 people. Okay? 4 people. They've obviously been on Ancestry.com. Okay? All right, that's what that is. And they're shaking their heads. They have. Okay? Apparently that's their hobby or whatever. That's it, right? I mean, we don't even remember our own family who was alive 100 years ago. That's how pathetic we are. I mean, you look at nature. If the secular humanist is right, think about it. We're going to make the world a better place? This is absurd. If the atheist and the secular humanist is right, and the universe is all that there is, then the universe is laughing its keister off at us right now. Because it's just a matter of time before we have another worldwide extinction event and humanity's gone. It's just a matter of time. It may take 1,000,000 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years. It's just a matter of time. It's happened before, according to secular humanists, so it will happen again. The math is there. The asteroid, this, that, it's all there. It will happen. And the only thing that survives are the cockroaches and those little sea creatures at the bottom of the ocean, right? It's just a matter of time before the sun burns out and Earth turns into one big popsicle. So really, you're going to make the world a better place? Our efforts this century are a blink in the eye in the life of the world. This is absurd. It's meaningless. It's like being on the Titanic as it's sinking, and people saying, oh, hey, wait, let's clean up the dishes in the dining room before we all go down with the ship. I mean, how dumb is that? See, if this worldview is right, if this is all there is, all of our work, I'm going to stop recycling if they're right. Right? I mean, why be a conservationist? Why should I care? Why should I care about genocides on the other side of the world? Why should I care about those people? They're just a bunch of chemicals and dust, and they're just using resources on a planet that has limited resources. A few less million people in the world might be a good thing. Ooh, how cruel is that? How cold and heartless. Yet that is the natural end of this worldview, a la China's birth policy and why they limit how many children you can have. That's just a natural end of that worldview. Boy, this is bleak, isn't it? This is really bleak. I feel sorry for you newcomers. Okay? We are not a church that you come here and we blow smoke at you so that you can leave feeling good because you've gotten a bunch of platitudes. No, we're going to deal with life. This is what the preacher does. He deals with reality. And the reality is that you can take your wife to lunch on Wednesday and 2 hours later she's in intensive care. That's reality, isn't it, Chris? And it's senseless when you look at it from this point of view and this worldview. You can't make sense of it. It's absurd. It's hevel. It's hevel. So that's why you've got to draw a big box around 3 words. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils? Draw a box around this, folks. Under the sun. It's a critical qualifier. It is a critical term. 29 times it's going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it refers to a life that is lived, divorced, and separated from God. As if God doesn't exist, as if God does not matter, as if there is no God in control, as if all that matters is this world and this universe that we live in, the worldview we were just talking about, under the sun. It's the secular life. So more literally, the question that he's asking is this: can we be successful in life through our labor and through our work and through our busyness by adopting a secular, humanistic mindset? And his answer, absolutely not. It's absurd. You'll never find meaning and purpose and peace with that approach. Really very short way of hearing the question. Apart from God, what will we profit in our work? Apart from God, what will you profit in your busy life? And the answer is nothing. Nothing. See, the preacher, his question and his answer, he's encouraging these young, upwardly mobile men who are being inundated with now a culture that has become more secular and has changed radically and is attacking their understanding of God and of life. And he's encouraging them to step back from that culture and ask the important questions and to think about their answers and to find the right answers. And that's what this book, Ecclesiastes, does. As one of the men has said, the book of Ecclesiastes is almost like a prequel to the Bible. An introduction to the Bible. If we could shuffle the books, put Ecclesiastes before Genesis, because it's raising the questions that we need to ask, and then it's pointing us to the rest of the Bible for the answers to those questions. Because these are important questions, and the scriptures redeem these questions, and there's hints of it even in the book of Ecclesiastes. You hear it throughout the scriptures when Jesus echoes the preacher, right? When he says, what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and he forfeits his soul? You can pour your whole life into your work. You can become a titan of industry in your own area like a Warren Buffett or a Elon Musk or a Bill Gates. But if you separate your work from the eternal, from what God says is important and what gives satisfaction and meaning and purpose, then your work and your career is nothing more than hevel. But the scriptures tell us that's not how it has to be. You do not have to forfeit your soul. In the Garden of Eden, God ordained work and toil. There is a way to work and toil. Hear this phrase, write it down, under the heavens. That's another phrase that we're going to come to over and over again in the book of Ecclesiastes, because he's going to compare life under the sun versus life under the heavens. And life under the heaven is life lived the way God says live it. And when it comes to our work, there is a way to work for the glory of God, instead of for selfish motives, or instead of investing in our careers, things that our career can never satisfy, like giving us meaning for life. The verses preceding what Jesus says, he tells us the starting point. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The first step in seeing your work redeemed, instead of becoming this hollow hevel of a God that will never satisfy and give meaning, is to turn your life to Christ, to embrace him, and to trust in him as Lord. And when you trust in Jesus as Lord, that means you surrender everything to Christ. Your entire being, including your career, including the busyness of your life, whether it's busyness at a company or in a bank or in your business, or it's busyness in your home as you raise those children, because that's your job right now. And you're surrendering that to Jesus because he's Lord of life. See, there's profit and satisfaction and our work and our labor and the busyness of our life when all of this activity is surrendered to Christ. You can be a businessman, or you can be a Christian businessman. You can be a teacher or a Christian teacher, a nurse or a Christian nurse, a therapist or a Christian therapist, an engineer or a Christian engineer, a politician or, no, you can't. Okay, no, you can, all right? You can be a Christian politician, right? It's an oxymoron in most cases, but not always. Right? Folks, whatever our labor, Jesus, if we understand this, when we lose our lives for his sake, when we lose our careers for his sake, when we lose our work for his sake, and we give it to him for his glory, we actually find life. We find meaning. And our work ends up being redeemed. So whatever our labor is, whatever our work is, it takes on a higher calling. First and foremost, it becomes an opportunity to represent Christ. We're in our work and in our labor and our busyness, we're his ambassadors, we're his voice, we're his hands, we're his feet. Our work is ordained by God. It brings order to his creation. It helps build civilization, which brings honor to God. Through our work, when we do it well, God provides money that we're able to take care of our needs and the needs of our family. We're able to fund the work of our church, the ministry of our church, and the kingdom work that takes place around the world. Our work becomes a means for God to channel through us resources to see people come to know Christ in our own community and around the world, and it redeems it. Our work becomes our major mission field, where we interact with people. And you may be a mom at home, and your work can be so mind-numbing at all, but you're interacting with 2 or 3 precious people, and that is your mission field. Or you may be an engineer at a company, or a teacher in our public schools or in our Christian schools, or a businessman who's interacting with clients, or whatever the case may be. And that is your mission field where you can show hospitality and friendship and the love of Christ, the person of Christ, to people who crave it and they need it because their souls hang in the balance. That type of work is not hevel. It's not hevel. Father, may this week our people experience your hand of grace and mercy in our work. Forgive us where we make work our idol and our means for satisfaction, where we build our identity around our business and our occupations and vocations. Help us to have eyes that see that is hevel, that it is vain, and it is meaningless. Instead, help us to find satisfaction in our work because we first find satisfaction in you, Jesus. For the one who's yet to take up the cross and follow you, may this morning or this week, may they get serious about their relationship with you, Jesus. May they start there. And for those of us who sometimes worship our job instead of worshiping you, Jesus, give us the grace and strength we need to keep those priorities in order. In your name we ask these things. Amen.